So, welcome everybody. Namaste. Good evening. Welcome to yet another Wisdom Jam. We're back after a long time, I guess, or it felt like a long time, but we're yet here again. Uh, People passionate about culture, people passionate about wisdom, people exploring some of these questions. And I'm very happy to be joined today by Shweta Arora. Namaste, Shweta. Welcome. Uh, Shweta, I mean, there is a formal and an informal introduction, both I want to do. Of course, formally, Shweta has an amazing journey. She's passionate about human potential, learning, diversity, working on leadership systems. She has a lot of her own leadership experience that comes from the social impact team at BCG. That's one thing that we kind of find in common. She's founding team at the Education Alliance, member of the team that created this program called Exceed. Uh, that's basically Shweta. And but I think the more informal introduction is that when we were looking at other people doing similar work, we came across the work of Core Question, and which is Shweta's organization. And we've just gone live, so namaste for people who are seeing live. So I was just introducing Shweta, and apart from BCG and several other places, we found something stunningly resonant and similar between the genesis of Wisdom Tree and what Core Question was out to do. With similar influences, similar references, similar language, and we were pleasantly surprised to find that it just felt like we were tapping into the same kind of energies, the same impulse. And of course, there's a past of a BCG Common Connect. I've had a short stint. You've been at BCG, and so it's interesting that some journey panels are also there. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation with somebody on a similar journey, similar passion. Uh, so that's my hope for the day. Uh,
Really
Shweta,
excited to be here.
yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. Really glad. When I was starting, one of the thoughts that came to me was this thought of parallax. The two eyes, when they look at something, they don't look at exactly the same thing, but almost the same thing. And when they're able to look at together, it creates a 3D picture instead of a 2D picture, right? And I've found in my experience of engaging with people who are on similar zones and quests, is we're able to see something in 3D instead of 2D, when we match notes and also I'm wondering whether this is going to be one of those diverse jams where two different views are dancing, or is it going to be parallax where we're able to see something 3D. So we'll play along. I'm happy to join in. So I thought, Shweta, we could start with since your organization is called the Core Question. It's not question, but I figure it's quest in. Uh,
Yeah.
I thought we could go into what's the core question we want to explore today. And typically, when we bring experts into the space, we would want to say, okay, what do you know most about? And so let me ask you about that. But I think in the jam, my invitation is let's go and lean to what is most important, but what we are not fully sure about, maybe, right? Like it would be very interesting to see what do you puzzle about, and maybe that could be the starting point of our inquiry today. So any questions that you're holding, and then maybe I can share some and we can zoom into something. So curious because, yeah, so maybe does that sound like a starting point?
Yeah, it sounds like a brilliant starting point. Um, so I think the thing that I'm most puzzling about right now is that, we're talking about thriving workplaces, and we're in a time where everybody seems to be talking about the fact that leadership needs to change, organizations need to be led differently. The narrative definitely seems to be shifting, but it seems to be much harder to shift practice. And while, individually, collectively, I'm sure we all want to create places that are human, where each person can thrive, where, there's a joy in work and not just a chore. I wonder why it's so hard to translate that into reality. What are the things that, keep us back? I mean, I can think of some like um, pressures of growth, a very linear kind of focus on you know just certain dimensions which we are trained to look at without looking at a holistic picture. But I would love to explore that more deeply in terms of, I mean, that's a question that I haven't really thought about. So taking your prompt of, leaning into things which are puzzling, that's something that came up for me.
Yeah, sounds like a delicious starting point. It reminds me of Otto Schammer saying, why are we collectively creating results that nobody wants? Because nobody seems to stand up and say, this is the world I want. Everybody wants a different world. Everybody wants a different leadership, and yet we're all kind of stuck here. So I resonate with it at that level. And the other, lately, I have been also kind of reflecting on my work as a trainer facilitator. So my journey has been training facilitation to OD to culture. It's been a flow, right? And I must confess that I was a big believer in training workshops when I would do them. I still do, but at that time I would only do that, and I would believe that things can change. The whole Anthony Robbins change can happen in an instant, kind of NLP world view. And now more and more I look at my own experience in my life and in people. Some things of course change quickly, but there are some things which take very long to change, years and maybe even decades. Right? Even about myself, there are some things. So change is not as easy as somehow it feels it's promised to people. Like, I don't know, if you're making promises which are unreal about change being easy, whereas it actually, the work of change is really intricate, complex, tough, right? And which is why I guess there's that stuckness around it. So I'm wondering whether it's our saying and doing gap which all of us have, uh, or whether it is something about collectively coming and our primal brain getting triggered, like not the playful creative brain but the fearful brain, and we kind of locking horns into like a low equilibrium and getting stuck there. Is that what's happening? So it's a great question, and maybe a good starting point for me, like you named a few things, right? There are some external forces, like you said, growth pressures, or if we could start with naming what are these external forces that are kind of locking us maybe into some of this non-thriving equilibrium. So what are some of those forces that you've seen that keep pushing you into almost like a earlier stage of consciousness, like a survival consciousness rather than a creative
Survival,
consciousness?
yeah. Yeah, that's how we look at sort of also the spectrum, that, on one hand it's just surviving and on the other hand is thriving. And yeah, it's a great question. What are the forces that sort of trigger that response of being in that survival mindset? I think one is that we have always thought of success perhaps in a certain way. And I think it takes a certain amount of evolution to think of success differently. How do you know, if you're not measuring revenue, profit, growth, productivity, etc., how do you know that you're successful as an organization? And it's great to see sort of, again, the movements towards a wider definition, a wider sort of expectation. But like you said, I guess change is hard and it takes time, and it's something that we talk about with all our clients. But you're right, it can be frustrating when you're waiting for something to change and then you're like, why can't we just do this faster?
Mm.
But yeah, what else keeps us locked in that survival kind of brain? I think what you were talking about before we started this call, we also have this tendency to take ourselves very seriously. And
Yeah.
especially in the workplace, oh my God, we're all here to do something so important. And maybe like because it's serious, it has to feel hard and not feel very good, or not feel very human or connected, or I don't know. School was always meant to be hard, and the pressure of exams and all that. Now things are changing in at least some progressive schools. Similarly, workplaces are like, if you're doing something important, it should be like you should have to like grit your teeth and get to work, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also the prompt for me. The universe has signaled that I should take on my additional flower as a part of my avatar. I think that's something I want to intentionally do to remind myself that this is all not serious stuff, that I've been authorized by the powers that be that I can do this. And I want to build on what you said, Shweta. I think so much of this struggle feels so unnecessary to me. And just reflecting, even on say this conversation, right? I could enter into this conversation with the intent to one up you, right? And say, okay, I have to come out of this jam sounding smarter, cleverer, and somehow something in that will evoke similarly in you that need, and we'll go into our patterned responses because we'll say the right things that we've said, we'll lose our vulnerability and authenticity, and we'll stick to safe ground, and it's almost like there's no fluidity there. It's just like we're frozen, and it's so unnecessary because there is a possibility that in a jam we both discover something new and we honestly show ourselves. And I think it is really possible and happens in every wisdom jam that both of us come out, not only being appreciated but also wiser, right? And so somehow then it makes me think that this whole hypnosis of one-upmanship, individual and collectively, right? Like some part of competition is reality, and I do want to acknowledge that. And yet at the same time, I feel so much of this feels unnecessary because if we tap into that playful imagination, into that creative possibility, it's not a fixed pie. We can truly imagine something. And I don't know, it's something very hard to land because I don't know, the basic instinct is to go into kind of that default preset setting, and I feel that is viral. If one person is behaving from a protective space, there's nobody else who wants to be open because they look silly. And that behavior, I don't know, somehow negative behaviors percolate very fast, or behaviors which are non-healthy, right? And I'm just curious, and in your work at Core Question, like where does the flip even begin? And I'm sure you're invited into situations where orgs are stuck at some levels, and maybe they're stuck. What is the crack that? What is the crack that kind of? Is there a crack you enter in from typically to move organizations towards thriving? Is the leadership the entry point? Is the problem the entry point? Is a strategic conversation the entry point? Is the board an entry point? And I'm curious about where does the first crack from where change enters? Where have you seen those cracks?
Yeah, I think the entry point or the question might be different every time. It might be, it might be the very questions we were talking about. Somebody struggling in the competitive environment. They feel that they can be better, but, something's pulling them down. In another case, it might be that they see a different reality for themselves, but they don't know how to create it. So there can be lots of different questions, but I think the thing that makes, starts a different trajectory or makes it possible, I think for me is usually just trust and human connection. And I think that's probably the starting point of any journey, because then it starts feeling really worth doing. It starts feeling like we're in this together. It starts feeling like we don't know the answers to this. What you said about vulnerability, it creates the space for that vulnerability and for that co-creation rather than the one-upmanship. So I feel like, whether it's working with a small team or whether it's working with a larger system, somehow just knowing that fundamentally at the core, we are all human, we are in this together, we are learning, we don't know the answers, and we can be better together, I think are some of the core building blocks. What's your experience?
No, deeply resonate. I think one question is how do we make I don't know as fashionable or more fashionable than I know? Because we've celebrated I know too much, through TED Talks and interviews and podcasts. It's all I know very often, right? You get somebody who knows, you ask them questions, they tell you what they know. I don't know is not yet as fashionable to show up and say, okay, we don't know, right? And I feel even with Wisdom Jam, some of the work we're doing is we stand on the edge and say, okay, we don't know. We genuinely don't know. There's not a real conversation. And I think I don't know is where the possibility lies, the future lies. And I think there's something about human connection and trust that you said, right? That when I trust that you are also a grappling human being and we're in this together, and nobody has all the answers or entirely has kind of their act together. Uh, then you build a certain, you rest a bit, I guess. I mean, for me also, a lot of our work I feel is about love, right? And like you said, though it sounds very trite and cliched, but these are the big building blocks, like just basic trust, basic human connection within the organization to partner. uh, yeah, so I know it sounds a little like millennials waxing eloquent about some corny kind of love romance thing, but I do feel that there is, and Ashok told me to ground this conversation into something doable and practical, and I think the basics are like just stick to your basics. Like for me, it's like brush twice a day kind of basic advice of human connection and trust, and there's very little to go wrong, and it's not as easy. I don't know. Somehow I feel like talking about trust is easy. Trusting truly, that's tough, and the risk of trusting, the risk. So I completely resonate with this idea of human connection, because even the engagements we get into, if you want to build humanness in the organization, my relationship with my client has to be human in the first place. If I create a transactional relationship to create humanness in the org, it's like you're just starting on the wrong foot, right? And I think, yeah, so totally plus to that. But the other thing that was coming to me, Shweta, as you were saying, was our relationship. And now I'm going to take the risk of going a little abstract thing. Our relationship with time, as if it's just finite and this is it, right? And so we don't have time to relate. Like, let's forget relationships. Let's just get into the task, and super task orientation on one end, and this assumption of linearity, that things will only happen linear. We work harder, it leads to just a non-creative, very linear way of seeing results, and then a single variable to measure it, or a few measurable variables, right? So it just feels very like locked into this. Time is less, measurements are limited, and the cause effect is linear. So let's act out of that, and that blocks. And then if I flip these three to say that it's not like time is finite, there is many times, it's not linear, it's a complex adaptive system, and we don't need to measure from only what can be counted, but there's a lot which can't be measured. I don't know. So for me, some of those also just opening our eyes to a different world. uh, I think that something like that comes to me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I'm coming off this trip last month and we connected about it. We have a common connection there, but spend some time with this organization cultivating leadership. And I think some of what you were talking about, like you were saying, it can be hard to do, but I just experienced it happening so beautifully. And I think their area of work or their area of expertise is really how to thrive in complexity. And so what you were talking about, the world is actually not linear, but I think our tendency is to try and control and behave as if it is, because that's the only way that we can feel in control. Otherwise, we feel completely out of control. And if we were to recognize that, it's a complex world, it's a nonlinear world, what are the ways in which we would lead differently or build organizations or systems differently or behave differently? And I think what I experienced in this organization was just amazing, like such a deep level of trust. And in fact, they recently wrote, after being in existence for 12, 13 years, they recently wrote down their sort of foundational principles of engaging with each other. And one of the first ones is trust. And, they demonstrated, like I reached out to them as a stranger and they welcomed me. And later I was thinking that, would I be able to do that if a stranger reached out to me? And maybe it's not that easy. But I think they've sort of practiced it. And when you've, really practiced that muscle, you exercise it even in the harder times. And the
Yeah.
same thing, like, not trying to think of everything in a linear way, or love, like what you said, I think sounds maybe, yeah, like you used some very eloquent words for it. But the fact is that, you know, yeah, I think in that time I spent with that organization, I felt so deeply human in all my glory. Like, there were times when I connection and excitement, and Oh, it says my internet is unstable. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. So now it was okay. In between, it slowed down a bit, but it's fine now.
Yeah, okay. Um,
So all its glory.
yeah, so I think consciously they built some of this in because knowing what they know about complexity, uh, these are the things. In fact, one of them has written a book called Unleash Your Complexity Genius, in which she talks about like moves that enhance our ability to deal with complexity. And one of them is actually love. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
so, and it's all based on science and all of that. So it's not all as woo-woo as it may sound.
Yeah. 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 No, I think all this to me seems so linked. There's complexity. So only logic and rationality is not adequate to navigate this because you're in a non-linear, multi-dimensional territory. And more, I see that a lot of our work is about getting people to fall in love with their work, fall in love with the cause, fall in love with the org, fall in love with each other. Right? That's what I mean. In a way, you're kind of saying, how do you create conditions that this love can blossom? Because it's when you act out of love, you're willing to put in more effort. You're willing to, dream together. There's something. And I'm a romantic at heart, so I see more and more my work that way. And I guess when I am in a space of love, then this whole illusion of control and my need to be in control perhaps could get replaced by a willingness to be thrilled, a willingness to be surprised, a willingness that disruptions will not stun me or irritate me, but I'll welcome them because they're thrilling. They're what life's made up of. And I'll use each of them to kind of almost like that Kung Fu Panda, part two, he takes those cannonballs and swirls them back because he sees them as dewdrops, right? And somehow I feel that from that space, if we're able to approach from the space of trust, from the space of sacredness, I would even say, uh, they perhaps able to deal with this challenge. And the more logically we try to deal with it, the more linearly we try to deal with it, we create more and more of this mess and consequences. And it just somehow I feel we're refusing to see that our previous tools are inadequate. Our toolkit is not adequate to the complexity we are now dealing with. And we need to upgrade our toolkit, or not even upgrade, I would say we need to reclaim other ways of knowing, other ways of engaging, and yeah, so I think that was what was coming to me as you were saying this. And one last thing, and then I'll leave it for you to pick any of these threads. And you said, we had a common connection, coincidentally in that org where you were. And if I remember correctly, he's like, there are 1.3 billion Indians, and I know one or two, and you wouldn't know them. And then it so happens that we know each other, and then it's like he knows a few Indians, and they know each other. And more, I'm convinced that this work, there's a tribe, right? A nameless tribe of people around, including the audience here, which energetically identifies and is like just a few degrees of separation. And I just feel somehow we're being called to do this work of moving the world from a very rational, tight, linear way to inviting a broader spectrum. I know somehow that seems to be a part of our work, right? At this stage where humanity is grappling with complexity, to say, hey guys, hold on. We need to look at other ways, not abandon the existing ones, but expand, and I know things like integral theory, and I'd love to hear what are your influences that kind of form your toolkit as you go about this complex work. So yeah, so there's several threads you can pick up on: the illusion of control, love, your toolkit, the tribe, whichever you
You know
feel
what
is.
I'm called to share really is while you were talking about love, I think the two words which for me have been very big, and recently we sort of did this values exercise for our organization, and we asked everybody in the organization to write how do they experience our culture, and the same two words somehow came out of that exercise, and those words are actually courage and love. And in some sense I feel like what you said about the tribe and being called to do this work, I think it's sort of like answering that call with courage. And I think that when courage and love go together, they somehow, create a very magical potion. Because
Mhm.
courage alone can be maybe, I don't know, it can be unidimensional, and love alone perhaps sometimes can be. But if we can be like, I mean, internally in organizations, if we can be, if we can hold each other with love, but also be courageous about pushing the boundaries, pushing our thinking, like challenging each other when we need to, so that we can create something that's bigger than ourselves. And similarly, in this bigger sort of tribe, as we sort of come together in these different ways, come with love and also with that courage. And I think, and that's why I love the idea of the jam and co-creating. In that sense, it takes courage, right? To step into a space without your practice thing, oh, this is what we're going to talk about. So I love that idea. And yeah, that's the one thing that I got called to share in
No,
response.
thanks for that. I think the courage distinction is very important, and that courage also, the source word is core, which is heart. I think, and love is also a matter of heart. So they both tie
Wow, I
at
didn't, yeah.
yeah, courage. And I think that distinguishes, when we say the word love, it distinguishes the type of love we are talking from smothering love, where you're going too soft on people, or just love that is manufactured, or artificial love, which is manipulative even, right? It kind of, to me, it evokes like a partly a warrior like energy, because the warrior is dealing with something difficult for the love of something they want to protect, or the explorer energy, where there is love for home but there's love for the unknown, or the king's love, where there is love but there is also commitment to justice, understanding that's a precondition. So I don't there is a nuance, I think, so that we don't lose the word love in its cliches, and hey, the guys are talking about love, but we distinguish. And I feel courage, bringing courage as a dimension to saying it's courageous love. It's love that can take risks, love that can confront, love that can admit that I do not know. Right? These are all acts of courage, and if they come out of love rather than helplessness, or out of a survival mindset, because courage can also come out of a fight, flight, freeze kind of that courage. But we're not talking about that, right? We're talking about courage from a more centered space, I guess, not from a desperation of like, oh God, if I'm not courageous, I'll die kind of space. But I think qualitatively, we're talking about a different form of courage, which is like love infused courage and courage infused love.
Yes.
So I love that distinction. I think that's so powerful. And that's something for me. This feminine masculine business is a little touchy and controversial in many ways, but I'm going to still take the millennial risk again of limited gender stereotypes, and say that there's something feminine masculine balance about this, right? So it's not totally like masculine, go sell the program, get this, nor is it entirely feminine saying that, oh, we'll just care for you and let's be one nice family and it's okay. There's something about holding these two together in balance, I feel we're talking about, right? Balancing, something like that.
Yeah. And I think the other big piece that I learned about in my time with cultivating leadership was this thing of polarities, right? And of holding polarities. And in some sense, I feel like maybe, it's like two ends of a polarity. You can't swing to the extremes. But again, being able to hold and manage polarities is a great tool to be able to deal with complexity. So, again, that whole thing of balance, I think, is beautiful. And the other, I mean, the really fascinating thing I saw there was that they actually express their values as polarities. So, so the one that they actually have is power and love. In some sense, similar, in some sense different. But yeah, I think, it connects with what you were talking about, sort of linearity, and not assuming sort of linearity, but really being able to, or like that one right answer kind of thing, or the I know, like being trained to say I know. It takes me back also to this professor of education who I learned with, and I learned so much. I think the one thing she taught us was that we may think we know something, but actually, when you start observing, you realize how little you know. And she made us do this with simple things like this problem of going to the movies. Like, there are 4 people who go to the movies, and what are all the different ways in which they can sit? And all Indian kids, very well trained, will say, oh, 4 times, 3 times, 2 times 1, whatever, that's the answer. But why? Like, why do you come up with, like, why that formula? How you actually start putting it, then do you realize that, oh, okay, that's the basis of the mathematical formula. Or the other thing she made us do was observe the moon. And I realized that I had always assumed that the moon is there at night, which is like such a stupid assumption. It's not true. I mean, the first time I was 24 or 25 years old when I realized, oh, the moon comes out in the day as well. Um, and then you start thinking about, oh, okay, so what is it that sort of, making the moon, whatever, show up in the way it does. Now, all this is stuff that we were supposedly taught. And when you assume you know the answers, you stop being curious and stop sort of noticing and observing and finding what's really at play. And I think the same thing translates in some sense, right? Like if you come to leadership with the mindset that, yeah, I know, or I've seen this before, I know the answer, then it just stops you from being curious, stops you from being courageous. It can be, I guess, the single most limiting thing to your growth or perhaps your organizations. And yet that's what sometimes is traditionally expected from leaders, to kind of know.
Have their act together, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. And for me, this topic of polarities is such a felt experience because of my bipolar. So I have a bipolar diagnosis, which has extreme manic episodes and deep depressive episodes. And the way I've figured to hold that is not kind of average myself out and sedate myself with chemicals that give me like a small spectrum, but it is to hold that tension and constantly keep rebalancing, not average out. So somehow I feel that balance is not the average balance of the two, and that would be equivalent of saying, oh, I'm popping lots of pills and I'm holding the polarity. That's kind of a cop out. It's not really what we mean, right? What for me, the deeper reflection also came saying that whenever I go individual, I start feeling high energy and kind of almost on my way to mania, and the more I go collective, I start feeling like my energy goes down. And so for me, it's balancing this polarity, the individual collective polarity, the mania depression polarity. And there's no one time settling formula for it, right? It's like each day I wake up in a different place, I have a different energy, I need to do different set of things to regain balance. Some days I'm not able to do it myself. I need somebody's input saying this might be happening. So I feel like the willingness to not rest and conclude, in polarity, balancing is not a one-time act saying, ye lo ho gayi balance polarity. Ab aage kya karna hai? I feel it's a moment to moment, day to day balancing and holding of the tension. I feel like in orgs and places, I've seen that as soon as harmony starts going out and conflict comes in, the org reacts to like, let's tide over it, let's get to consensus. Whereas holding that tension is where something new gets born, right? Holding the tension of polarities.
Yeah. And leveraging the power of both, I guess. Like, I mean, I don't know how, I don't know if it's appropriate to say that in the example you shared of bipolar, but in some sense, there's an energy and there is a, something that comes with one phase of it. And there is a perhaps sensitivity and really like deep feeling and connection that comes with the other part of it. And really being able to leverage those, like, and not say, like you said, not shun the extremes and try to find an average, but really find the magic of both in some sense.
Yeah, I mean, the way I've made sense of this is that these are natural energies, and I'm not like clockwork who wakes up, and nobody I think is a clockwork who wakes up every day with same energy. But I guess in bipolar, it's so magnified that you can see it. So what you're saying, like for me, these are natural energies, and if you understand those energies, you can harness them. And like we've harnessed wind, and sailboats can go without. So for me, also more and more, the work is one sensing the energy. It's like reading where the winds are today morning as I set my sail, and then how do I harness it without getting too drawn by the energy also, because one can like float away either of the directions, right? And yeah, and they allow a very different set of possibilities. Different energy allows a different set of possibilities. And somehow, at least for me with mental health, it's been very hard to adjust to a world which broadly expects fixed schedules and ignores the rhythms, because I have cycles and rhythms, and the world somehow expects to show up in fixed ways. And for some people, it's like clockwork, right? Okay, great, they can do that every day. But for a person who's cyclical, like I say, there are the sun people and moon people, and the sun people are people who can, like the sun, kind of rise more or less same, just vary by a minute. But moon people, I feel, are like cyclical, and I feel like I'm a moon person. So I feel making space for these ways of being also is a part of our work. I feel that to allow different ways of being. Why does everybody have to show up in a fixed way if we can find ways to work together? So I know it's deviated a bit, but I feel it's somewhere linked, right? It's linked to diversity, which is an issue we're passionate about as well. That how do we make space for different ways of even being, not only different ways of knowing, and can we all come together? There's some chat responses, sorry, but we'll do that post the talk. So we've not kept it as an open format. So I'm just acknowledging them, but also saying we'll respond. But yeah, Shweta, so just, yeah, I think that is where I was, that there's a lot of potential and beautiful idea to look at values as polarities, because beyond a point, the same extreme value can create its negative effect, right? And so it's a beautiful idea, polarities.
Yeah.
The other example, the movie example that you gave, saying in how many ways can four people sit, and I was like, yeah, and maybe somebody wants to sit in somebody's lap, and that way of sitting is there. Maybe somebody wants to sit on the aisle. Maybe somebody doesn't want to sit on their chair and sit at a emptier, better seat, right? We also do that once in a while in the multiplex. If there's a better seat available and nobody's sitting, you're like, chalo jaake baith jate hain." Right? Who knows? Who
Yeah.
knows? And I'm saying that to reduce it to a probability question versus to move it to a possibility question, and say
Mm.
there's an infinite number of ways. Yes, sure, for the mathematical probability calculation, there is an answer. But from a playful, creative, and contextual lens, right? If we strip away context, the answer is fixed. But maybe if you bring in context, there are so many different things going on, right? And and I think somewhere I feel that in trying to make things efficient and trying to make things work, we've stripped away a lot of context. Uh, and I feel some of our culture work is about restoring context, being sensitive to invisible conditions that one is operating in, and not generalize and import models. But uh, yeah, so there's something for me, at least in our work at Wisdom Tree, realizing is like that there are certain patterns, but there are no formulas, because each org is so unique. The recipe of what works for each org is so unique that to claim that, okay, here's the model, at least for us, like, okay, then we can do some of that, but each org's uniqueness is such a so curious about diversity as a thread, because you're passionate about it, and curious about the other piece as well, uh, in terms of orgs and their uniqueness.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I love what you say about, possibilities, like creating possibilities rather than boxing things in. And I feel like a big challenge for, organizations today is to create the conditions where there can be greater, like more distributed leadership, and there's wisdom that comes, talking of wisdom that comes from every corner, not just from some expected places, but from everywhere. And to your point of models, well, I think we have taken an approach where we have a certain sort of like a certain model or a lens to look at this, but we do sort of feel that yes, each organization is unique, and some things may be more relevant to them in their context at a particular point in time, and might be the right starting point to actually figure out, where do we start that change from? And for others, it might be a completely different place. I think the model is just for us a conversation starter, or again a set of possibilities. Like it could be that we find resonance in one, or it could be that we find resonance in another. And I think what the model serves us to do is to say, okay, people who have thought about this problem, from different lenses, what are some of the possibilities that they have
articulated, or
and so to draw from that, but then also to just use that as a spark for a conversation and then build from there, rather than take it as a
as a given. But on that note, also, I mean, the passing thought that came to me was, as you were talking about this, and this is now your life's work, and so what I was curious about was what excites you about your work, and why this, and why not anything else? Why choose? So I was curious about it as you were speaking. I was like, yeah, you've done so much about this, you thought so much about this, so that curiosity popped up, saying why thriving organizations, why this work? What about it drives you, excites you every single day to show up?
Yeah, I think everything has a personal start to it, right? I think for me, it's perhaps the realization that there were phases in my life where I felt like I was truly thriving, and I was, sort of being able to be like a bigger me in some sense. And there were periods where I felt I was coming from that very survival mindset, where I was just kind of trying to like just keep my place in the world, and was not my creative best self. And I think that might be the origin of it. And then the other piece was that we started this organization in COVID, and then we saw how different, how differently different organizations responded. And it really made us curious that what is it? And, like people had such a different experience. Like for some people, they felt that sense of empathy and connection, even though they were all isolated and sitting in different places. Whereas in others, people felt truly isolated and cut off. And it really made us wonder that, it made us wonder about many things. It made us wonder about the fact that what is it that creates some systems where, which respond in a way that is much more productive in a time of crisis, and other systems kind of start breaking down. And does it also link then with success? And then when we started saying, does it link with success, we came back to that big tricky question of how do you define success? Because if you define success in those same narrow metrics which we were talking about at the beginning, then maybe there are many other things that impact that. But if you define success as a broader definition of really being able to thrive in this complex world, being able to sort of weather the ups and downs of the kind of time that we have seen in the last few years, to be resilient, to be sort of, to come out stronger at the end of a crisis, then perhaps it leads you, really to start discovering a different set of answers. And so, yeah, I think, so when the four of us came together, like the four partners, I think we were very drawn by sort of a human-centered approach to work and to leadership, because I think that's what resonated for each of us, perhaps because of our own personal stories, because of what maybe had made us successful or not successful in our lives. And then when all of this happened and we got so curious about this question, we said, okay, let's dive deeper into this. And as we dove deeper into it, I think a great question is one that you get more and more excited by as you learn more, right? And the whole vision of a world where organizations really are bringing out the best in every person, where there is this sense of human connection, flourishing, thriving, was just, I mean, it was something that warmed us.
Nice.
It
Yes.
resonates for you as well.
Yes, yes, totally. That possibility excites us, and just, yeah, I mean, in the not-for-profit sector, for us, Wisdom Tree, we were passionate about the not-for-profit sector, and we're like, evolutionary impulse, seva bhav, soul force, and some of those also. Then those who do this kind of work, how can they do it without being angry, bitter, burning out, but do it from a space of abundance and nurturance? So definitely, that kind of a view. But I'm also mindful that one of the mandates for our conversation is to ground it. And as much as I'd love to meander, I think just to ground this back to saying that, okay, if the people who are listening to this conversation, and if between us, I don't know if it's fair to give pointers, work out a recipe, or give a bunch of questions on how to create a thriving organization. But I'm just wondering if it helps to give some starters, to say, okay, maybe these questions or maybe these things are a part of how to start the journey towards thriving. So I'm wondering if we can kind of just share a few quick, graspable, doable entry points. And then if that excites, there's always Code Questing, there's Wisdom Tree, there are many others who are doing this work and they can reach us and do this journey more deeply. So wondering if there are any starting tidbits to nibble on as journey starters towards kind of bringing thriving in. So curious if we can do a couple of those. And
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe it's a good time to go back to our model because that's where this originated. And maybe I can share like bits. So, the way that we've thought about it is we've sort of broken it up into three broad buckets of leadership, and which is how we lead, teaming, which is how we work together, and the broader sort of organizational systems and stuff that we create. And while the whole model might become too much, it's like 10 dimensions across these three. I'm thinking maybe just one across each of the three that sticks out to me is what I could share right now. And I think in leadership, it's, what's been very alive for me in the last few years is really the inner game of leadership. Like, how do we how do we think about ourselves? How do we think about success that we've been talking about today? How do we what are the assumptions we make? How do we create inner resilience? All of that. I think in teaming, one of my favorites is what we call courageous, the word again, courageous collaboration. In some sense, courageous love, but just in more corporate language.
yeah. Courageous collaboration.
Yeah, but really, like, how do you break silos, break boundaries that exist, and it's built on a base of connection and love and belonging, and then it moves forward by saying, can we challenge, can we share honestly, and build together something that's bigger. And then in the systems or the organizational part, I think my favorite one has to be learning and agility. And I think part of learning, I think that I like most is the fact that can we create a place where it's okay to fail. And it's very easy to say that, like, saying that, but it's very hard to do.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And like, really, how do we respond as an organization when someone fails? Do we celebrate it? Do we sort of really create the space for many kinds of experiments in a way that obviously, like, some are designed that they will not work. So yeah, I think those are a few tidbits that come to me immediately. Like,
nice. Yeah. Those are actionable also. And I'm struggling grounding because I feel there is an evolutionary impulse in every organization, every collective. And to listen to it, I don't know if it's slowing down, quietening, or catching the pulse of the moment, of what this organization could be, or what is it longing to become. Somehow I feel that the pathway to that pulse is not the leaders personal ambition as much as the org's collective kind of vibe. Something about if you're able to listen to that deeper impulse just by coming into a circle, sharing stories, sitting. I don't know I mean, there's some basic ways. It's not like some very complex, like diagnostic, but I know how do we listen to that? Because that to me gives clues to what might be emerging next. And if you listen to it correctly, I feel we get everybody on board because you didn't listen to one person's or a group's ambition, but you heard the heart of the organization, what it longs for.
Yeah.
And for me, it's not a way, somehow, while it's complex because orgs can't take out time to do it, they can't do it by themselves because they're too caught in day to day things. But it's actually as simple to me in a very primal way as coming around the fire to say what makes your heart sing, and some very basic questions. What do you love about being here? When are we at our best? Like your classic appreciative inquiry kind of thing. And unleashing that energy and letting that take over, slowly letting that move us rather than the fear-based energy to move us. And I feel that journey to thriving, and just to map back to the three things that you said, right? To me, the idea that interbeing, right? That I'm connected to you. Our destinies are connected as an organization. I can't be happy if you're sad beyond a point of time. Like we create frustration. Truly, can we all be happy? So that interbeing is the other, like being able to just see that, my inner game includes seeing my interdependence, me embedded in a web of life kind of a thing. So I feel like those ways of seeing and the ways of listening
Yeah.
also might begin kind of the journey to thriving. I think those were some things that were coming to me.
Yeah, no, and I'm going to look back because one of my favorite books, and it's very conveniently lying right behind me, is this one. And when you talked about listening
Yeah.
to evolutionary purpose, I'm sure you've read this. This also has in
Yeah, yeah,
text.
yeah, absolutely.
But I
Totally.
love it because in some sense that I have lots and lots of post-its and all on it. But I love it because in some sense, it makes a lot of what we've been talking about very real by taking stories of real organizations and showing that it's not just nice to talk about it, but how how they actually like brought into practice some of this, like listening to evolutionary purpose or creating self-organizing groups that then really have the autonomy to lead an organization in the direction that they are called to, and how I mean, I was amazed to see in contexts such as manufacturing where you kind of assume that, oh, there at least things are very linear, but actually it was amazing to see how some of these principles come to life. And yeah, I recommend it to everyone.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Before we take the last leg of our conversation, because we are on time, I also did happen to see one of the audience comments about saying, is it all right to generalize psychiatric medicines and the horizon of treatment in passing? I was talking about my bipolar, and I definitely want to acknowledge that it's an important point. And just to give context around what I shared, so that I don't I do the same thing, strip away the experience from context and kind of peddle it. Is that so? I was diagnosed in 2007. So it's been 16 years since I've been kind of navigating these waters, and I'm a strong believer in medication to kind of help manage this. And it's taken me that long to reach a place where I'm able to do this whole holding energies and light medication. And it's been a long learning journey and a learning curve. So I would definitely not kind of if this is possible over a much longer treatment horizon, and it definitely is not at all meant to kind of discount psychiatric medication. In fact, it's precisely because of that that one is able to hold that balance. I think that's so. Thanks for bringing up that very important point. Um, so we're on our last leg, Shweta, and the last leg is always this mysterious, mysterious. Where do we want to land this conversation? We've grounded it, and but I'm curious about how do you look at your work and our collective work? Because at this time, this stage of the world where things are kind of hurtling out of control in some way, also the way AI is moving and the way biotech may move and the way things are getting polarized. It's just getting faster. I feel the world's getting faster. more and more is happening in lesser and lesser time. We're all entering our private universes curated by tech. And there's enough to feel out of control, hopeless, overwhelmed, anxious.
Yeah.
There's so many of these mega forces operating, and sometimes I feel like there's how much can a small group of us talking about these things. I somehow feel like we're the noises that are around us, are we even being audible to what needs to be said? And at the same time, I'm obviously a believer in hope, and that it's like वो एक चिड़िया चोंच में तिनका लिए जो जा रही है वह सहज में ही पवन उनचास को नीचा दिखाती. Like it needs just one sparrow to fly with a small stalk of grass to show that these winds can be overcome. So I'm on both places. I'm just curious, how do you look at your work and our work, I would say, in this larger context at this time in humanity, at this stage? How do you see the work that we're doing?
Yeah. There are three words which are coming to me from the rest of our conversation today in response to this question, which are not three words, I would say three phrases. One, that change takes time. And the second, that we can't think of time very linearly as well. Um,
Interesting. Yeah.
Third is courageous collaboration. So, all of us coming together in different kinds of ways and remembering that, like I keep telling myself that bamboo example, we have this big grove of bamboo actually in our home. And every time I see it, people say that, oh, for 5 years you may see nothing, and then suddenly you'll see this big. I keep telling myself that because I feel like, we're all kind of planting seeds and you don't know what seed will sprout. But as long as we're sort of being courageous, working together, like breaking some of these boundaries and remembering some of this, that, yeah, change takes time, but time is also multidimensional.
Yes. Yeah, beautiful. I'm left with the word remembering somehow. That I feel some of these capacities are innate to us, and we lose them. And I feel like playfulness, for example, or trust, right? And I feel there's a part of us that innately has these capacities, and a lot of it is about rekindling and revoking imagination, revoking trust, revoking playfulness. And so I do see that some of our work, like you said, is also reclaiming our earlier relationships with time, with and so on. So I think for me, the how to create thriving organizations, a part of it is definitely futuristic looking. A part of it is remembering who we were, remembering what's at the essence. What is all this about? I think that to me seems to be at the heart of the matter. So this was a lovely conversation, Shweta. Thank you. I mean, this was great fun. I mean, this is
Yeah.
beautiful meandering chat
Yeah.
with the project.
Amazed that an hour has gone by. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been an hour. So any final thing that you'd like to share? I'm just left with a lot of gratitude for this conversation, for you leaning in, sharing, and what it evoked in me also. I think because these are things that always the person, right? Like it's always something gets evoked in the space. It's not only so. Yeah. So just happy about the different evocations. So anything
Yes.
from your end to close?
Yeah, I
Where
think
you left with? Yeah.
similarly here, I feel like, the human connection, I think that we started with. I feel that.
Thanks a lot. And thank you to the audience. Please do reach out to Core Question for some awesome, awesome work and transformations. Reach out to Wisdom Tree, if not for profit is your orientation. Either ways, that's, I mean, I think I'm together, the kind of work we are doing will all add up. I think I'm a big believer in that.
Yes.
And great. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Shweta. Thank you, audience.